Hello, and welcome to the first Quantum Mythology presentation. You might remember from my introductory material last week that I talked about there being two different types of myths, in the sense of there are ancient myths, myths that have been around for a long time, stories that we're all familiar with like in fairy tales or in Greek mythology or Egyptian mythology, really good stories that endure over time because they have great meaning to them. And then there's another kind of myth, and that's what I'm calling the modern myth. Now with modern myths, these are stories that emerge in the collective consciousness of man, and often these things happen because they have a particular message that they're trying to convey to a society that has neglected an important truth and has turned away from the truth in some significant way. And today I'll be talking about zombies, and I hope to make this point with you that that story actually has a lot more going on than just a bunch of dead people walking around. Oh, and by the way, do you like the Herschel look that I'm going for? It's not actually Herschel that I'm doing. I'm getting ready to do Santa Claus, which I do every year in December, and that's what that's all about. As I said a few moments ago, what I'm going to be covering today is zombies. Now, I believe zombies are a modern myth, and for very good reason. I think that when we look at this story more closely, we can see components to this story that actually are addressing some major problems that are happening within our culture today. So, what is it that's trying to get our attention in the zombie story? Well, I think the best example of this myth is The Walking Dead. And so I want to ask you to go back to the very beginning and think about what happened in the very beginning of this story. A man awakens in a hospital bed. He looks around and he realizes that he's all alone. As he goes out and he wanders around, he discovers lots of dead people. He sees lots of evidence of gunfire, and he comes to the realization that his society, the world that he knew before he was wounded and put in the hospital, has completely disappeared. He looks around and he realizes that what has happened is a zombie apocalypse. Now, what apocalypse is the end of a civilization. This infection that apparently was causing people to become zombies had become so widespread that civilization as a whole completely fell. So what was this infection? Whatever it was, the consequence of coming in contact with it is that it would kill people, but they wouldn't completely die. They would die, but a short while afterwards they would reanimate as the Walking Dead. Now these Walking Dead immediately animated with one motivation: to eat. And they would eat anything and everything. And if they came in contact with another human being and they bit them, then that human being would become infected as well. So only the primal reptilian brain was left in the Walking Dead. And the only way to deal with the Walking Dead would be to shoot them or stab them in the head and destroy the reptilian brain. If you didn't pay attention, the zombies would get you. If you tried to ignore them, the zombies would get you. Life had completely changed for the people in this story. The first part of this story begs this question: is there something going on in our world that we need to wake up to? So let's begin to look over the story. Now the way this is going to work is I'm going to give you a piece of the story, and then I'm going to give you something to think about in terms of what that piece might be about. So the story begins with Rick waking up in a hospital and to discover that the world that he knew has completely gone away. What was this infection? Well, the humanity in the person was destroyed by this infection, and it was replaced with a monster. So we need to remember that in this myth, civilization fell because of the spread of this dis-ease. Sometimes I hear people say that there really isn't anything to threaten America or to threaten the world in which we live today. And that reminds me of the Roman Empire, which was the greatest power on the face of the earth. There was no other civilization that could stand up to the Roman Empire. But what happened to that empire? Well, it rotted from within. Rome was corrupt in the center. And where did that begin? It began when the Romans felt that their lives were all about consuming. There was a practice that the Romans used to engage in where they would go to a food orgy and they would eat and eat and eat till they were stuffed, and then they would cause themselves to vomit so they could eat some more. Romans had become consummate consumers. Everything was about feeding their needs. Sound a little familiar? And when they did that, they stopped paying attention to their citizens, and that began the downfall of the Roman Empire. Is there something like that going on in our culture today? It's a question worth thinking about. We may say that we are the greatest country on the earth, but I would ask you, what is the purpose of our society? What is our purpose as individuals? Have we lost our way? Are we like Rick, wandering in the darkness or the wilderness and waking up to the fact that civilization is falling around us? We say in our culture that we are about the freedom to pursue happiness, but are people really happy? There's a really interesting scene in Fear the Walking Dead, another one of these shows about zombies, in which it's the early stages of the zombie apocalypse. Things are just starting to fall apart, and the police and the military are trying to deal with the problem. They're trying to deal with the spread of the infection. And people are around watching what's going on, and instead of cooperating or helping or supporting the police, they start to riot and interfere with the police doing their duty or the military doing their duty. And one has to ask, what is going on that people would actually riot in the streets instead of cooperating with the police or the military? Does that sound familiar? Have we seen any evidence of anything like that going on within our culture within the last couple of years? Why would people do this? They do this because they've lost hope, because their lives have become meaningless, because they don't see that life has anything to offer them. And I think on an even deeper level, if all our society is about is being good consumers, then we have lost our way, because life will not have meaning if all it is about is consuming. We all need to have purpose in our lives. We all need to feel like we're going to contribute to something greater than ourselves. I often work with nurses or teachers, people that are out there in the world trying to make a difference. And one of the things that I hear often is that they are so frustrated in their jobs because their jobs have become more about money and less about taking care of people, less about education and more about getting money for the school board, less about good health care, medicine. I have a friend who's dealing with cancer, and one of the things that she's very concerned about is that they have such an aggressive stance towards cancer in the sense of operations and medicines that they always seem to want to do the most expensive thing, and she's just not convinced that they are always have her best interest in mind. Having an operation is a lot more profitable for a hospital than advocating a change in diet or some sort of other alternative medicines. Remembering that the infection creates a monster within people, and that monster is that these people become mindless consumers that will eat anything and everything, and yet they are not nurtured. So we have to ask ourselves the question, is there any evidence within our culture or our society of insatiable appetites that will eat anything and everything and yet not be nurtured? While America may not be the largest country in the world in terms of its population, it certainly has become the largest consumer of the world's natural resources. Remembering in the myth that whatever they ate did not nurture. And do we see any indication of that within our culture? Do we see that no matter how much people have, it never seems to be enough? That there always seems to be a need to make more money, Does our desire to consume occupy more of our attention than our consideration or our compassion for our fellow man? If our society is focused strictly on consuming, then we have lost our purpose and life becomes meaningless. No matter how much we consume, we will never fill the empty place in our souls. Does our struggle with drug and alcohol addiction indicate a much deeper wound on the level of the soul? Do we consume illegal drugs knowing full well that many people died in third world countries in the process of getting those drugs to us? Is that not mindless consumerism? Do we compulsively replace our clothes every 6 months because they're made from inferior materials just because we want to have something new to wear to school or to work? Not give any thought to the fact that those clothes were manufactured in third world countries, in sweatshops where people are given barely enough money to feed themselves. One might say that this disease is a disease of the absence of the heart. We have lost our compassion. We've lost our consideration. We've lost our thoughtfulness. We need to remember that sometimes we are a victim because a change has taken place in our society that we were not paying attention to. Remember that in the story, if you don't pay attention, the results are deadly. In The Walking Dead, there's a community where people live inside some walls that they believe are going to protect them from the infection, and yet that does not work. Is that so different from trying to build a wall between Mexico and the United States? Is there not a deeper problem there that will not go away strictly by building a wall or by putting more people on the border? Is there a deeper problem that's a problem of the heart? We cannot wall ourselves off from our problems. We are a society that still does not give women equal pay for equal work. We are a society that does make decisions to move factories overseas, knowing full well that many people will be put out of work. In The Walking Dead, as I said, this is a story that's more about just dealing with zombies. In this story, we see the difficulty and the struggle that people have in dealing with each other. There's a great deal of conflict that occurs between people in this story. There's a struggle between people that are trying to care for and protect the people that are part of their tribe, and there are people that are barbaric, cannibals, violent, because they think only of themselves. The Walking Dead protagonists are forced to deal with people. And I believe we are a society that tries to avoid dealing with people and avoid dealing with our great social issues of our times. I hear people say sometimes that they hate politics. Politics means of the people. And in any political struggle, there is always the potential for great conflict. But our great strength happens when we find the way to work together to overcome our differences. That seems to be absent within our current political system, in my opinion. It seems as if it has become so adversarial that third-party candidates actually are becoming viable, or people that are outside of the normal political system have become viable in the minds of Americans because people are fed up with the fact that we have lost our capacity to work together. Now, maybe we don't want to think about these questions that I'm raising. Maybe it's difficult, or maybe we feel frustrated. We feel like, what possible difference can I make? But change always begins with the individual. Changes within ourselves, changes in the way we live, the changes in the way we interact with each other. We can interact with each other with more kindness, more compassion. We can resist the tendency to engage in road rage. We can resist the tendency to walk away from difficult friendships or difficult relationships, difficult marriages, and try to find ways to work out our differences. There's a scene in The Walking Dead in the second season where Lori is talking to her husband Rick about their son who's been shot, and she raises the question, why? Why do we care about whether or not he gets better? Why do we want him to regain consciousness? Look at the world in which we now live, Lori asks Rick. That is so horrible. But Rick says to her, we must always find our courage to live and to support each other and to go forward in life. Lori reminds Rick that there was a lady named Jackie who earlier had decided that rather than deal with life's difficulties, that she was just going to commit suicide. And that is something that some people choose to do. It may seem as if problems are so great that we cannot make a difference, but we can. We can if we can find our motivation to live for something other than just to be good consumers. So that's my presentation today on zombies. Next presentation will be on vampires, and I think you'll find that equally interesting. I thank you for your attention today. I hope that you did watch the commercial because that's how I get paid for this class. Otherwise, the class is free. Please, if you enjoyed this presentation, tell your friends about it. Encourage them to subscribe to my YouTube page and spread the word. Thank you.